Welcome to a very special edition of Toplines and Tales. Once again this week we are kindly sponsored by Harbro, manufacturers of high-quality livestock nutrition. Well, I'd just like to say happy birthday to us at Toplines and Tales, as on our 57th episode this week we celebrate 1 year since the start of this podcast. The series originally, of course, was brought out on what would have been Royal Smithfield Week, so it's only fitting that, once again, we revisit that Royal Smithfield Show when we can have a listen to the highlights of what since has become to be known as the Smithfield Tapes. Starting with our very first podcast guest, the legendary Ian Anderson.
Ian, if I can come to you, welcome. When was your first Smithfield, Ian?
First Smithfield was in 1965. And that was, I was working for a Major Gordon of Lud Estates at Blair Athol. And I went down there with a Highland steer, and the only one we had.
None of us remember the train going down. I mean, you'll be one of the few people that would remember going down on those journeys. And
I remember the long journey from my first ever time also went to the Scottish National, which was in the old Waverley Market in the middle of Edinburgh. The Waverley Market, the Waverley Station.
Oh, right.
And then the long journey down, and we went down, myself and another 4 or 5 stockmen in a guard's van at the back of the cattle wagon. Uh-huh. And there was a coal fire in it, and that kept us warm. We were going sitting in the siding and outside the Earl's Court for bloody ages, and then eventually we went up in it.
And the cattle were taken out and into a huge lift. And then up we went, these huge lifts, and into the Earl's Court itself. And I think we got inspected there. I think they got dusted with lice dust and things like that at the time, if I remember. But anyway, that was my very first experience, and as I say, a wee guy from the hills of Inverness, away there to London. I got my eyes open.
I'm sure you did. I think we all got our eyes open when we went to Smithfield, to be fair.
Sandy Beaton, you've had a long association with the Royal Smithfield Show. What were your first successes down there in the sand?
My first success was in 1963 with a Hereford steer for Commander Collard that was breed champion. And he was called Double Diamond. We called him Double Diamond because he had 2 crosses of Verne Diamond in his pedigree. And I always remember Lord Brockett must have been there for the day, and he was head of Hindcoop and Allsops. And he came to me and asked me why I called the steer Double Diamond. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, if I get the chance, I always drink it. So he gave me a tenner, and which was a lot of money in 1963.
Welcome, Hector Campbell. Hector, you'd have had a long association again with Smithfield, mainly showing cattle for, of course, the great David Sinclair.
You'd take quite a lot of cattle. How many cattle would you usually be taking down to Smithfield from David?
There would always be in the teens, 15. The most we ever took was 28.
28, aye. That's a lot of cattle there, and it'd be a huge job with that many cattle, both at the show and at home. And I've got to ask, where the hell did he get all this cattle from?
At that time, you had an Angus bull called Kermac of Thorn that bred a lot of good females, and most of the baby beef ones were homebred.
Phil Sellers, welcome to the podcast. You and I go back a fair way. Phil, when we first met, I woke up in a bed next to you in the bowels of Earl's Court, I think in 1977, and I remember asking you if it was your first year there, as it was mine, and you said no. Can you tell me your first year at Smithfield, Phil?
1961. I was 10-year-old.
But Smithfield wasn't always about winning the Supreme Champion. Not only 1 or 2 animals could do that. The rest of us would take a variety of other breeds as well, so we can fill in the classes and get some more crack.
I appeared on London Weekend Television with a Chianini. That is one of my claims to fame. And on this Sunday, I think it was.
Hector, can you explain to our listeners what a Chianini is? It's not a drink.
It's a Chianina with
It's an Italian breed of cattle.
It's an Italian breed of cattle, not a cocktail. Okay. And what the hell were you doing with one of those?
Oh, we had 4 of them. Every one was last in its class. But the Chianini Society put up £4,000 to be split amongst the Chianini entries. So David Sinclair entered 4, and there were only 4 there, so he got £4,000 for the. So that's what we'd have paid our wages for that weekend.
Welcome, Sharon Sellers. You guys would have a few different breeds down there as well.
Sid always insisted on taking a Galloway because the Galloway Society used to give you £100 to take one. So we had to have a Galloway whether we wanted one or not, because that would pay for the fuel.
The show just had its own atmosphere, though, didn't it, Sharon? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I think just arriving in London in your lorry, you're driving around the middle of London with your cattle in the lorry, it's just bizarre. And that's like the start of the atmosphere before you get parked up and before you get past all the vet checks, and then you get inside, get your digs, and then that's it. It's like party week, hard work week, and unbelievable atmosphere.
I remember the parties in the Seagrove Road car park. We'd get there I'd go down with Howard Patrick. We'd get there at 1 a.m, and the party would be going on until they opened the doors at 6 o'clock to let us in.
Andy, you don't call it a party. It was a welcome drink.
Bart, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Okay, and you and I go way back as well. I remember you having a milk round, and when you had hair.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And when was your first Smithfield, Bart?
It was sometime in the 80s, Andy, but I remember my first Smithfield because I took some cattle for Sue Eaton Williams, and I was kind of late getting there, but I couldn't get in Earl's Court. I kept going past the entrance. Well, I couldn't get in Seagrave Car, so people had seen me, and they all said, "Where's Bart? He should be here by now." And Willie said he's been past it 3 times, but he doesn't seem to be able to get in.
Colin Suter, welcome. You'd have had a long journey down to London from home.
I always shared the lorry down with Hector, and as the day went on till we arrived at Smithfield itself, like Hector got a little more intoxicated as it went. And I remember one year, Alan Scott, the haulier that came down, he had a Renault Magnum, and it was the doors set off to one side, and watching Hector going up trying to climb into the cab, as the night went on, it got worse and worse and worse.
All this before we'd even got through the door, but physically getting into the place was a bit of a nightmare as well, wasn't it, Sharon?
It was. Going up the ramp was if you arrived on a real snowy, frosty, skiddy weather, and you'd got to get your beast up that ramp, you do your vet check and then get up that ramp, and you knew when you were up that ramp and inside you'd made it.
Dougie Macbeth, another seasoned campaigner in those great days. Dougie, you'd arrived there and it could be snowing and slippy, as Sharon said, and getting up those ramps there, and Chris, it was hardly safe, was it?
Well, if you had your cattle haltered good enough and well enough, it shouldn't have been a problem, but there was 1 or 2 that obviously decided that they weren't playing ball, and the 30-foot drop from Earl's Court down into the car park below, if a beast had went over there, it would have been curtains for it, unfortunately.
And the wooden sheds that we had, and
you'd get the cattle off the wagon, and they'd all be so short of water, they're all trying to drink out of every puddle, and they'd be in there. They'd check them for warts and ringworm and stones, and it was a nerve-wracking time.
When you got through the door, that was the worst bit. There was bloody people building stands everywhere and junk everywhere, and it was a bit of a job negotiating everything to actually get to where you needed to tie the cattle up.
Of course, Smithfield wasn't just about cattle. There was a vibrant sheep section. Malcolm Stewart, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about that. Section was kind of tucked away at Earl's Court. They were housed upstairs and had been for years and years and years. And we used to get up there on the escalator. But a question a lot of onlookers ask is, how the hell did you get them up there?
They arrived obviously early in the morning. They were unloaded in the bowls of Earl's Court where they were vetted and checked and ear tags checked and whatever else. And then we went up in a lift, and the general thing was if you got into the lift, you were in the show. So that was your one aim. That was the first aim of Smithfield, was to actually make it into the lift. And then you had to run them through, because that Friday morning the show was still getting constructed, so you run them through trade stands and amongst electricians, painters, joiners, and you penned them up. It was a bit of a circus, but all great fun.
It was chaos. I think we've discussed this certainly in the cattle lines, that you think this is so chaotic. How the hell does this thing work? But somehow it did, and you just got on with it.
It did. It just was a lot of teamwork. It was a great team building exercise for everybody first thing in the morning, and then you just go on with it for the rest of the week.
And maybe had a dog.
Maybe had a dog. Just as well. I don't think it would understand all the different regional accents that were, because I mean, obviously there was guys from Scotland, Kent, Devon, Wales, just a real old mix of what was going on.
Bart, we used to wash the cattle outside, cold water, just tie them to anything that didn't move, and just tie them up and chuck a bucket over them. There's no power washers or...
No, I think I was probably the first one with one, Andy. I took one year, don't you remember? I had to thread a cable down through the toilet window and then out into another room, across the way somewhere, and hang it above, because I was going underneath with forklifts and things. And I managed to get my washer set up that year. And that was the one year I actually became friends with David Sinclair, because he decided he would use it. I was a popular man that year.
I remember using it as well, I think. And Hector, there'd be cables running everywhere and hair everywhere, and you're trying to find a small corner to get and work into. It's a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, cables running through puddles of water. Health and safety would have had a nightmare these days.
And those first dryers, the Wolf Sapphire was something that came out of a DIY shop, and but they were a revolution to us, weren't they?
Leaf blowers.
Leaf blowers, that's it. I had one for Christmas in 1977 from my parents, and that was the best Christmas present I ever had.
And then inevitably the electric would trip, and it'd trip out, and the whole place would just go plunged into silence, and we'd all go to the bar until somebody got it fixed again.
And everybody blame everybody else.
That's about right. I've heard it suggested that somebody who will remain nameless tripped it on purpose so that he could get away and get a dram.
That was.
Of course, again, what a lot of people don't realise is that underneath Earl's Court there was another level, another entire layer of Earl's Court, if you like, which included our dormitories and sleeping quarters. And you slept in B block as well. I remember. Yeah. It was bloody warm down there, wasn't it?
It was warm, and it was just a bit noisy when the train decided to...
Yeah, so there were some great characters back in B block there. I can remember the Welsh boys by the entrance. Winston Bowen, Mervyn Abredhouse, Di Bonks. Di was an amazing character.
Mervyn and Di were nicknamed the Owls because he used to go out all night and sleep most of the day.
Di was something else, wasn't he? I mean, he just seemed to know everybody. You know, I think he knew everybody in London, that guy. He was just something.
Yeah, he knew far too many people, I'll tell you.
And what other characters? I remember Julian Hopwood and his dad had been down there. Who else can you remember in that block?
Well, Willie Seals used to kip down there, didn't he? And
Peter Best, Hackett.
Yeah. I remember an old boy called Alan Cruikshank, and I think he used to dress cattle for John Mansfield. And I don't know how old he was, but he was always pissed. But he used to nick everybody's grub out of their pantry box. So Big Gary Owen put a mousetrap in there and caught him on the fingers.
I remember the Owls came in one night, really one morning. The Owls had been out one night, so they decided to bring a bit of entertainment back with them in the form of two young ladies. And Willie Seals was trying to get them into bed with him, and Sid was trying to get them out. Sid weren't having any of that.
And we're going back to Sid. I remember there being a campaign saying to I think it was to do with a gas board, and it was like "Tell Sid." So everybody used to go around. There was big signs all over London saying "Tell Sid." So we used to tell him every time we saw him. Poor old bugger.
Can you remember the garden centre they created round the bed?
I was going to say that it was one year. One year Sid wasn't well, so Jill had nicked a plant from one of the trade stands and put it by his bed. And as the word got round, then more plants started to appear until about midnight, and he was totally surrounded by them.
It actually started because he said he wanted the Christmas tree out of the foyer He wanted to get that down to the billet, and he was going to take it home. So bigger and bigger and bigger plants arrived each night, and he still wasn't satisfied until he got the Christmas tree. And the last morning he woke up, he thought he'd woken up in a forest because everybody had taken him more and more plants.
Like a jungle.
It was like the botanical gardens.
Do you remember when he nicked his pyjamas, Fred Harrington, and took him to the tournament pub and
put him on a mannequin?
On a mannequin, yeah, that was it, on a mannequin. And my dad walked in and he looked at it and he said, "Hey, I think they were my bloody pyjamas over there. How the hell have they got down here?" Fred Harrington and Sandy Beaton had took them.
Sandy, that's a bit of an accusation. Have you got anything to say to defend yourself?
Well, somehow or other, one of our company found one of these nude mannequins on the way out of the hall, going to the Prince of Wales, and then they say somebody put Sellers's pyjamas on it, but I never saw that happen at all. But I think he did have a pair of pyjamas on.
Phil, going back to that downstairs, and it was just a maze of corridors down there. Went on for miles and miles with this grey concrete and spiders. And do you remember the old canteen, Phil?
That was good, though, wasn't it? That was good.
It was about 10 pence for a breakfast or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing, that was, Andy. That was bloody good.
I remember spending about 3 hours looking for the bloody place because everything looked the same. I've still got nightmares now about walking around grey corridors looking for my breakfast. And there were always a few farmers, Phil, wandered around downstairs looking for a free way into the show. And for a £5, you could direct them to the service lift for bar 6 if you wanted to.
Remember that? Do you remember that? We needed a bit of pocket money.
Sandy, you were the scoundrels, you and Piccolo Pete and Colin Davis and Prowler and Fred, and you're always up to bloody mischief, the lot of you. Just tell me what it was like down there.
Oh, it was good, yeah. I remember, do you remember Gordon Lobban? He was up on the Cotswolds on Hereford's. He found a bicycle down there one night, and he said it wanted repairing, so he finished up just about dismantling it. I don't know if the fella came the next day to ride it, but he would have a hell of a job.
I was told, I think it was either Piccolo or yourself, got on it and rode it around the dormitory, came into our B block and rode it twice around the dormitory and back out the door again.
Now that was Piccolo Pete, he was always fitter than me.
Malcolm, there'd be similar sort of stories, I guess, going on up the stairs as well.
Well, the great lady Muriel Johnston had a dry sherry too many and got a wee bit wobbly on her feet. So she was sitting in a kiss to regain her composure. And we thought, well, how are we going to get Muriel from here into the Mowbray? So somebody says, go and get a wheelbarrow, Robert. So Robert and Julie went to a wheelbarrow, liberated one off a stand. So we got Muriel loaded into the wheelbarrow. But this time she'd recovered and thought this was great fun, two young men chasing around Smithfield in a wheelbarrow. Well, we came to a T-junction or a crossroads in the trade stands. I went right, Robert went left. The bottle came off the wheelbarrow and Muriel went straight on.
Oh, Lord above.
And one morning I woke up and my bed was in a totally different place. What happened, I think Pete Bodley was involved in this as well. You guys, I was fast asleep and you carried my bed down the long corridor and then stuck me in the isolation box, and there were people turning up for the show and they're all wandering by having a look into this box there, and there's me lying in there fast. Eventually, I'm not sure if health and safety caught up with it, but the place got condemned, and probably rightly so, and we all moved on. I think later on we all moved into hotels. I certainly know when Jill came down, I used to move into the Mowbray for 2 or 3 days when she was there, and that was some party house, the Mowbray.
Oh, well, you see, you must have been better off than us, because Phil took me to some dowdy place on Earl's Court that had got horrible candlewick bedspreads with bits missing out of them and 19 scratched furniture, and he thought that'd be good enough for me.
And then we all used to head uptown. You're saying about the owls, but we all did it as well. We used to head up nightclub until 4 or 5 in the morning back then. I don't know how the hell we did it.
But then were the days. One night in particular, we Bartle well remember this. I think we danced constantly for about 6 hours. Where were we, Bart?
Hammersmith Pally, that was.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, that was some night. That was on the tables. I was feared we were going to fall off because there was a big balcony in front of us, and if we fell off there, that would have been good night for them.
Donald McPherson, welcome to this episode of Reminiscence. And you or your father would certainly enjoy a bit of crack too.
Old Ewan would enjoy a dram and the crack, and he'd liven up just about any party I ever went to anyway. And he was a West Coaster through and through, wasn't he?
100%, yeah. And, you know, he lived for it right until his dying days. He was just, that was all that was in his head was Winter Fair, Smithfield, and the local shows, Lauren Show and Middergyle and for William. So, you know, it was all, he loved it. But it wasn't about the winning, although he did like to win as well. But it wasn't all about that. It was about the crack.
Malcolm, how much, as a sheep breeder, how much did that Smithfield Champion Rosette mean to you from business terms, or was it just a hobby?
That's what I wanted to do. I mean, when I was going full belt at it, that's with a flock of ewes, especially for the job, they were lambed in June. We bred the ewes to go into this flock, feed with a nutritionist employed like everybody else did. They were just programmed from before they were conceived for the first week in December.
But once the show actually got started, you got to get your animals to the ring and back out again on that Monday and Tuesday. It all seemed to fall into place there, didn't it?
And also, Hector, you'd have to pass with your beast. You'd have to pass bar 6 on the way to the ring very often, which was quite necessary.
Yeah. It was quite handy to have a friend there just to hand a glass out now and again if you were getting thirsty.
And not just for yourself, though. We'd give a dram to the beasts as well. Would you do that?
Oh, share alike.
Well, the year of the power cuts, you remember when the barriers, you'd have a glass of whiskey on the counter and you couldn't get at it because the barrier had come down. You had to wait till... You'd wait till the lights come back on to finish your drink.
Well, the best one in bar 13 upstairs, the year Bruce Lang, he brought a penny cheviot bred by his good pal George Mellon, got a first prize, and they decided they would dress for him the next day. Well, by the time they were finished, they had the dressing stands physically in the bar.
And of course, a show like that attracted its share of famous faces, but none more so, of course, than the royal family.
Hector, the Queen Mother was just so interested in everything, and she couldn't wait to get out of the main ring and then walk down the lines and go and talk to everybody, and she just loved it. But I believe that she had something to say in the 70s about your hair there, Hector. She said it was quite awful.
Yeah, well, everybody had hair like that in the 70s. But
thankfully we didn't, to be fair. But
they're walking down the lines, down Aberdeen Angus lines. We had a little black heifer, and she could kick for Britain. And my job that day was to stand behind this heifer just in case it lashed out. I've had all sorts of jobs in London. But
Sandy, you'd know a little bit about that. You'd have had a few loose-footed ones amongst the Galloway cattle you used to take down.
Yeah, well, the amusing thing to me was that beast could stand me, but nobody else, and he kicked like a bloody horse, kicked backwards. But Muriel, knowing what Galloway's like, she must have known that because she never touched that animal on the back end. She felt him on his rib and every all. But he was, if you'd have pushed that bullock, he would have fell over. He was half full of whiskey. To try and get him to stop kicking, and it didn't.
Ian, the prize winners, of course, all got introduced to some of these celebrities as they came through, particularly, of course, the Queen Mother.
And a nice lady to chat to.
She said, hello, Ian, it's about time I've seen you again. It's been 12 months since you said.
No, she said if you've got time later on, they'll fancy coming into the wee back room for a dram. Well, I had to decline that particular time, but I said that, we'd meet up again some other time for a dram.
Keith Jempson, welcome, another familiar face down there at Smithfield. And Keith, considering we got 400 cattle into the middle of Smithfield and then out again, and the chaos that could cause, it seemed to run like clockwork, really. There'd be the odd issue that us as stewards would iron out, or yourself would iron out, and But generally, it just seemed to flow, didn't it?
It was run by people that knew how to do things, and us younger people as well, when we started, we had respect for those people. And what they said went. You didn't argue with anybody. If they said jump, you just said how high, sir.
Can anyone remember the fire?
Yes. Down in the basement with a straw, the hay.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
That was animal rights.
It was.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
It was,
animal-
which is why I'm going to mention it, because it was the animal rights, and Peter, as they call themselves now, they thought that it would be sensible to set fire to a shed full of 400 animals just to save animal rights. That didn't make a lot of sense then, and still doesn't.
No,
But I remember being there at the time. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, a Saturday evening, and having to get all the cattle outside, literally 4 or 5 in each hand. We were all hoying things down the ramp and standing outside, and the smoke was pouring up through the grating underneath them. It was quite scary. And as you said, we were at the show for a week, and it was tiring. And then we've mentioned this again. We'd all get home and we'd all get pneumonia because we'd all be.
I can remember being taken ill at Smithfield. That's back in my Sussex days, and I was rough, and they even got the vet to me.
Jill Owen, welcome to the podcast. Jill, tell us a little bit about your earlier days at Smithfield.
Our first year there was 1988, but back in those days, Andy, it was very different to today, because we could stand in Carlisle Market and you could pick a good bullock out of a pen, and yeah, you'd have to pay a bit more, but we very rarely paid over £1,000 for a show beast.
Jill has a fair point there, doesn't she, Donald? But it was everybody's dream to win, there wasn't it, to get your beast into that glass box. And you were no stranger to the glass box, Donald. You won Smithfield 3 times in all, I think twice in London, and then once when it went on to its new venue. Is that right?
I think so. Yes, that's right.
And then another 3 times reserve as well, which puts you in the glass box 5 times, which is up there with some of the most successful exhibitors, certainly of the century. So, in fact, for a decade, you were bloody hard to beat. To be fair.
Yeah, for a wee while.
In that glass box there, it was a sort of magical feeling being inside there. People sort of standing outside, peering at you like you're some sort of specimen. Somebody likened being in the glass box like being inside the tent pissing out for a change. I thought that was a good analogy. Another well-known face in the sheep lines upstairs was Robert Patterson. Robert, welcome to this podcast. You'd have had your share of wins up there on the sand?
Fortunate enough that the judge liked our lambs on the first day, and the championship judge thought the same. But the thing about the show ring at Smithfield was it was to show the sheep in sand. And my God, you would know about it by the time you'd shown for a day in that ring and that sand. Your knees were absolutely gowping. But the great thing about the sand was if you'd one lamb smaller than the other, you could build them up. You would spend, when the judge had his back turned, you were pulling sand in below their feet. And what a carry on, man. But
Donald, your first win was in '89 with probably one of the best animals that many of us had ever seen, a beast called the Bandit.
Yeah, that's right. He was a wee bit before his time, probably. In today's market, he wouldn't really be looked at, but at the time, he was way ahead of his time. I remember we saw a photo of him in the Scottish Farmer, and then my dad went up to see him at Lathern Show. James Mackay bred him. Well, he did the deal with James and then went up to collect him. And when he brought him home that night, we let him loose in the byre. And geez, that feeling when the hairs stand up in the back of your neck and you just think, ooh, here we go, we've got something here. And we just knew that he was a wee bit special. The kind of modern beasts now have got so much more width and muscle about them. Back in our day, Andy, they were all very showy, flashy, nice heads and very correct legs, but there wasn't so many with the big carcasses. Now everything's got a big carcass on it, and it's not so easy getting the flash in the legs, but when you do, boy, you hit the jackpot then.
Jill, would you contradict that?
For me, and it was actually a year that I just went down to Smithfield with the young farmers, And I just stood outside the glass box in amazement when I looked at the bandit. I just thought he just took my breath away. He just seemed so far ahead of his time. Just tremendous, absolutely tremendous.
I gave up showing cattle when I took on a job as cattle steward there, but my father carried on showing a few lambs upstairs there.
I do remember you showing an absolute clinking pair of bloody mains that were about 60 kilos. They were way too big, but they were a clinking pair of lambs. I do remember that.
It's my lack of experience will never cease to amaze me. The Texels came steaming in the 80s, I suppose, or the late 80s, and about the same time the Charolais were doing the same thing downstairs, and they turned the thing on its head a little bit. And I think it was Dave McKerrow that won with the first Texel. Would that be right? Anybody remember that?
Yeah, possibly would be. The one that really dominated it was Alec Brown. Once he learned, that's what you had. Alec dominated it for 2 or 3 years. He was the one that really took the Texels to the top, I would say. Would that be fair, Robert?
That would be right. Aye, Alec was the main man for the mid to late 80s. I would have thought he would be pretty untouchable.
Richard Colgrave, another man who was hard to beat. And
yeah, well, it was one of those. There was a few guys that would always you would always look at and you would say, well, if we can get past them, we're not going to be far away. And Richard would certainly be one of those guys that the rest of them would be saying the same about,
As with downstairs, I suppose from time to time the sheep lines would put up a little bit of controversy, Robert.
Oh, there would always be questions asked about certain people how their sheep were bred, how people get their lambs just that wee bit sparkier and things. But there was always wee corners of people grumbling about somebody's pen of sheep and because they looked a bit different,
No passports back then, no passports still.
No.
So it was no science attached to it, was it? You had to believe.
No DNA or nothing. So
I all just added to the crack, I suppose. It wasn't just the kiss parties though at London. The crack sort of was continuous. It started from when we got there, and then we're in Bar 6 and then the Sheep Bar and the Prince of Wales and the Mowbray. Anybody listening to this, I think we were pissed all the time.
It's a fact, but mind you, a lot of the time we were. But it was just a kind of steady drink though. It wasn't like paralytic and then a big hangover. It was just kind of steady, and then in the morning, she just went in gently with the port and brandies and just eased into it gently at Bar 6. We liked them.
But of course, most nights we would have a kiss party if we could. And that was, if I remember right, was some party we had at Farmtech in
Yes.
some kiss party, Donald.
I think that was the one where the walls burst, wasn't it?
I think the walls burst.
Yeah.
I think everything burst, to be honest.
I think you're right.
You probably don't know this, but myself and Donald Bigger that cleared up around the kiss party the next morning, sort of breakfast time, and for anyone who's around, and we picked up 53 empty whiskey bottles from that.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that does not surprise me.
What do you remember about it, Donald? Not a lot.
I remember going to the off-licence 3 times in total, like once at the start and then twice after that. So, yeah. And then the rest is a blank, I have to say.
Because the kiss parties originally was just a few people around a box, but by the time we got to the last show, there was an entire room full of kiss and 300 or 400 of us in there, and we were supposed to be out of Earl's Court by 6 o'clock in the evening, or 7 or whatever it was, and all the security guards had formed, and they basically made a human circle around the kiss, and they were asking us to leave, as a steward, Donald Bigger had said, I was, go on, Andy, you deal with this, and he sent me out to talk to these guys to buy you guys another hour of drinking up time before they came in and had a massive fight, and all the guys inside were going, come on, bring it on. It was just chaos. Bart, you got a few memories from the kiss parties?
The Scotch lads, quite late on this was, a lot of the Scotch youngsters were getting a bit raucous in them days. They decided to bear the backsides when we were in the usual Flower of Scotland and all that malarkey. And they bared the backside, so Willie, but the missus, decided she'd strip off instead. That was a much better idea. So she got on the showbox in the middle in the kiss party and stripped off her. Most of the Scotch girls were horrified, but everybody else thought it was just top job.
It was,
until Willie covered her modesty and took her off.
I'm not going to comment. Anyway, Sharon, times started to change, and more women used to start showing the animals, fluttering your eyelids at the judge. It was despicable behaviour.
You did whatever you had to do, Andy. And I didn't care if it worked.
Jill, the show did become a little bit more female-orientated at last, didn't it?
When we used to come down to Smithfield, we used to bring the lorry down, and we used to go to Marion Doan and Fiona and their Galloways, and we'd all come down together. And there was a really nice group of girls back then, and yeah, we all got on, and yeah, it seemed to start a bit of a change. Because I remember donkeys years ago at the old Birmingham Fat Stock show. You'll remember this, Andy. My dad used to go there, and there was like the stock men's evening and strippers and all sorts. Whereas that had all changed, thank goodness, when in the late 80s.
But it wasn't just inside the exhibition hall either. We'd spill out into the streets around Earl's Court. In fact, London used to say it would take more money in Smithfield Week than it would the whole of the rest of the year put together. The Mowbray was one of our favourite watering holes, Donald.
Oh, fantastic times. Like the Mowbray Court was just bouncing when we were all in. And it was the big South African boy, I can't remember his name, that was behind the bar. And every round you bought, because the rounds were going all over the place, every round came to the same price. It was always £90. And it's like, holy shit.
But the barman, he was on 23-hour shifts. And old Fred used to call him Sinbad, if you remember.
It was the bit when if you got a first prize, you come down in the morning, and whoever had fallen asleep in the bar the previous night or that morning, they got some old duvets and they hoiked the duvets over anybody that was still there at last orders and let them sleep it off in the bar. Just that was very good of them.
Not just the crack, but the show was about friendships, wasn't it? We just all loved it together.
The atmosphere was fantastic. You know, just the buzz of people around, the applause, just everything.
I had a heifer there, I think, in 1982, a Limousin heifer, and I was standing top of the class for a while, and I remember you overtaking me and stealing that class from me with a heifer, so maybe that was the one.
Oh.
I've forgiven you, Sandy. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have. That was a good thing about Smithfield. You could get beat or beat somebody, but no malice after. You know, it's a friendly club. Like, it was a tremendous atmosphere.
Mike Tucker, he gave that place such an atmosphere, you know, with his commentary that you just felt it was special. Whatever you won was special.
It was fantastic. They were just, days to, you know, we'll never see again. We'll never see them again.
Everybody just seemed to really just get on and have, everyone, you know, you were competitive through the show, but then at night time everybody came together and had a drink and a lot of crack and really enjoyed themselves. It was getting to know Hector Campbell that opened a lot of doors, and the whiskey and the drink just absolutely flowed. The crack was just incredible, and I just can't. It was brilliant days, Andy. Absolutely brilliant days. You've always got the memories of that, and the fun and everything that we had was just incredible.
Now I've got people from Wales down into Devon and Cornwall into Kent that I'm still in contact with, and the only reason I came up against them or ever knew them because it was the great thing Smithfield Show and Earl's Court, and that's a bit I miss. It's just meeting people and the communication I had with everybody.
And people like that who would come and talk to young people like me, it's just incredible. You know, these people that had so much knowledge, and you learnt so much from them.
One of the saddest things for me was in 2004, people were saying, is this going to be the last show? And I went, no, we knew we'd got one booked in for 2006, and then all of a sudden, for reasons beyond our own control, the show folded, and we never really got a chance to say goodbye, and I'll always be saddened by that. Anyway, it's great to hear some of these old reminiscences of that fantastic event, and to all of those you youngsters who never got there, you're probably fed up with hearing about it, but thanks to all our guests on the podcast from 12 months ago, and thanks for listening to the highlights of what has now become known as the Smithfield Tapes. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast, which was kindly sponsored by Harbro, suppliers of quality commercial and pedigree feeds and expert nutritional advice. Visit their website or find them on Facebook for more information. And while on the subject of Facebook, why don't you visit the Toplines and Tales Facebook page, where you'll find photographs and more information to back up this episode.